Yeah. How do I turn this?
Is that a gang sign?
Ken Schweda and Evan Stoskoffs are two typical white American men who live in a modern little city named Overland Park, Kansas. They both fell head over heels after one date with a significant other they met in town. The only difference between these two is that they fell in love with each other. After about a year of dating, Ken and Evan traveled to Florida, where Ken got down on one knee on the boardwalk on the beach and proposed. For any heterosexual couple, this was the best day of a man and woman's life, and they couldn't wait to tell their relatives about it and start planning their wedding. But for Ken and Evan, it may have been the best days of their lives, but the thoughts that followed were not the excitement to plan the wedding. The questions were questions such as, how are we going to get married in our hometown when same-sex marriage is against the laws in Kansas? If we do get married in another state that same-sex marriage is legal, will our marriage still be legal when we head back to Kansas? How far away is the nearest pro-gay marriage state? The difference between these two post-proposal thoughts work as evidence showing that the laws some states have against same-sex marriages are unjust laws. How can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer is that there are two types of laws. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. Martin Luther King Jr. used this in his statement in his letter from Birmingham City Jail to create his definition of just and unjust laws. He advocated that the segregation laws which were in place in Birmingham at the time were to be considered unjust. In the letter, King describes three criteria for an unjust law, which are: an unjust law degrades human personality, it is inflicted on a minority by a majority that is not binding on itself, and it is a code that is inflicted on a minority which that minority had no part in creating or enacting. In today's world, King's definition can be applied to other laws enacted since he wrote the letter. For example, in April 2005, Kansas voters approved a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. Shortly after, despite the voting effects of homosexuals that proceeded in Kansas, the constitutional amendment was passed. This amendment read, "Marriage shall be constituted by one man and one woman only. All other marriages are declared to be contrary to the public policy of the state and are void." The criteria that King used to define an unjust law applies to the constitutional amendment Kansas passed. As written, the amendment degrades the personality of gay people, the amendment is inflicted on a minority by a majority, and finally, gay people did not participate nor approve of the creation of this amendment. According to King's definition of an unjust law, the new Kansas amendment must be reevaluated because, as King states in his letter, an unjust law is no law at all. Homosexuality was introduced into the human language as a word by medical professionals in the 1990s. Ever since then, homosexuality has been a controversial topic among most states. Countless states have argued over whether or not same-sex marriages should be legal using different political views, constitutional rights, and even AIDS and HIV test results. Various individuals have their own views on homosexuality. Many different states have voted and passed numerous different laws regarding the topic, ranging from Oregon repealing the sodomy laws in 1971 to Wisconsin becoming the first state to pass a civil rights gay law in 1992. 15 states then passed DOMA-related laws, Kansas included. Today, in Kansas, gay marriage is explicitly banned by states and no same-sex relationship is allowed to be legally recognized. In his letter from Birmingham City Jail, King outlines why an unjust law is not a law at all. His first criteria states that an unjust law cannot degrade human personality. By Kansas not allowing same-sex relationships to be legal or even recognized, the state of Kansas is degrading those who participate in the same-sex relationship or marriage of their chosen personality. By not allowing a homosexual to even be recognized as being in a relationship, this law is not allowing them to be recognized as the person they are. More simply, this law is degrading their personality to become what Kansas laws portray as the socially acceptable or correct personality or relationship to obtain is. This law is putting restrictions on who a citizen of Kansas is allowed to be and who they're allowed to be with, which should be free. Everybody has rights and rightful laws they live by. Why should this law be allowed in a place that takes away those rights and freedoms from a specific group of people? The United States of America is a free country. People have rights, freedom of speech, and just laws to keep this country in order. So then why can't homosexual people be homosexual? It is a personal choice that expresses freedom of speech and human personality. People should not be punished or degraded for making personal life decisions. The fact that there is a law against homosexual marriage is not going to keep people from being in a homosexual relationship. The Kansas Constitution containing this anti-gay marriage law as it stands creates hardship for people in committed same-sex marriages. This also goes to show that this law degrades human personality because the law does not prevent these same-sex relationships. It just forces people to take extraordinary measures to get protections straight couples get automatically. King also describes this as an inflicting law upon a minority of people that they had no part in creating because they did not have the unhampered right to vote. It is not fair to take a small group of people and inflict a law on them just because there isn't enough of them or people who support them to vote favorably. Then, after the law is passed, it only affects that small group of people, in this case, homosexuals. By making same-sex marriage illegal, we are inflicting a law on a minority that the majority is inflicting and the law is not willing to, nor does not have to follow, according to King's definition, that is unjust. Ken Schweda and Evan Stoskoff followed through with their wedding plans by getting married in Iowa. Iowa was the only state a reasonable distance from their home in Overland Park that recognized and performed same-sex marriages. In this article on Ken and Evan in the Kansan, the author Hannah Wise used the title Back to Reality to begin talking about Ken and Evan's return to Overland Park, Kansas. This title implies that Ken and Evan's marriage was just a fantasy and now they have to go face reality, go back home and pretend it never happened. Well, to Ken, Evan, and the state of Iowa, this fantasy actually did happen, so they should be able to go back home and live as a married couple, just as a man and a woman did if they got married in a place that was not their home. However, to the state of Kansas, they were not legally married. Kansas does not recognize Evan and Ken's marriage. How is that fair? Just because they are two men engaged in a non-traditional marriage, they can't be recognized as a couple or in their own home? That is demeaning, unjust, and inflicting a law upon a minority group of people. In the end, Wise describes the Schweda-Stoskoff family as a truly modern family. They have 3 children who live a fairly typical and normal life, despite having 2 dads, instead of the traditional mom and dad pair. All 3 children agree that having 2 dads is not a big deal. Ken and Evan have to find ways to work around the state ban and laws on same-sex marriages. Since according to the state of Kansas, the couple is not legally married, they do not get Social Security tax, land ownership, or contract benefits. When buying a new home, Evan had to write Ken into a living will as an inheritor of his house instead of listing Ken as a joint tenant on the mortgage. Even though Ken and Evan did find ways around the Kansas laws banning same-sex marriage, that does not make it okay. They struggled with things that a man and woman would never have to struggle with. That does not show equality or freedom, which is not only something promised in the Constitution, but something that defines just. These struggles are just another way to support the claim on same-sex marriage bans being unjust. Using the DOMA Act as their guidelines, almost every state in the United States, including Kansas, voted on passing laws against same-sex marriage, and majority of them passed. This controversy has continued to be a subject for debate today. On Monday, May 7, 2012, Education Secretary Aaron Duncan became the latest Obama administration official to express support for same-sex marriage, echoing similar statements made by Vice President Joe Biden earlier that day. In response to their claims, President Obama, who had initially opposed same-sex marriage, took the official position that his stance on the issue is evolving. Although Congress in some states passed DOMA in the past, their stances on the topic are consistently changing, and there are some states who initially voted against DOMA acts, believing this law is unjust. 6 states, Connecticut, Iowa, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Oregon, and Vermont, have now legalized same-sex marriage. The Defense of Marriage Act and laws Kansas have passed in favor of banning it are unjust, and unjust laws are no laws at all.